The old space station floated in the darkness like a ghost ship. Hyunwoo guided his small repair pod carefully through the twisted metal and broken glass. His job was simple. Go inside the abandoned station, find anything valuable, bring it back before the station fell into the nearby star. Omega-7 had been empty for over 200 years. Nobody talked about what happened here. The Galactic Council just called it a failed experiment, but Hyunwoo had heard the whispers. Some said it was a prison. Others said it was worse than that. The young mechanic did not care about old stories. He needed the money. His sister was sick and the medicine cost more than he made in a year. So when the salvage company offered him triple pay to explore the dangerous station, he said yes without thinking twice. His plasma torch cut through the outer hull like butter. The metal was old but still strong. Whatever they built this place to hold, they wanted to make sure it stayed inside. Hyunwoo pushed through the hole he made and turned on his helmet lights. The corridors were huge, much bigger than any normal space station needed. The walls were covered with strange markings that glowed faintly in the dark. They looked like warnings written in a dozen different languages. Some he recognized, others belonged to species that had been extinct for centuries. As he moved deeper into the station, Hyunwoo noticed something odd. The power was still on. Not everywhere, but in certain sections. Red lights blinked in steady patterns. Computer screens showed data that made no sense to him. How could anything still be working after all this time? He followed the power cables through a maze of corridors. They all led to one place, a massive door at the heart of the station. The door was sealed with locks that used technology he had never seen before. Energy barriers hummed around it. Warning signs covered every inch of the surface. Hyunwoo should have turned around. He should have reported what he found and let someone else deal with it. But something made him stay. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the strange feeling that something inside was calling to him. The locks were failing. He could see it in the flashing red lights and the way the energy barriers flickered. Whatever they were meant to keep inside would not stay locked up much longer. The systems were dying after centuries of constant use. His hands moved without conscious thought. Years of fixing broken machines had taught him to read the signs. This was just another puzzle to solve. He rerouted power from failing systems. He replaced burned-out components with spare parts from his kit. He worked with the focused intensity of someone who had learned that machines only stayed fixed if you did the job right the first time. The massive door groaned open slowly. Beyond it was something that took his breath away. A chamber carved from a single piece of crystal stretched out before him. The walls caught his helmet lights and threw them back in 1,000 different colors. But it was not the beauty of the room that made him stare. In the center of the chamber was a prison within a prison. A sphere of pure energy held something that should not exist. The creature inside was enormous. Even curled up as it was, Hyunwoo could see that it would be larger than his repair pod when fully stretched. Scales covered its body like liquid starlight. They shifted from silver to blue to gold as the light hit them. Wings that could span a small ship were folded tight against its back. It was a dragon. A real dragon. Not the tiny flying lizards that lived on some colony worlds. This was something from the old stories. The legends that every human child heard but no adult believed. The dragon's eyes were closed, but Hyunwoo could feel its presence like a weight in his mind. How long had it been trapped here? How long had it been waiting for someone to find it? Warning lights flashed faster now. The temporal field that held the dragon was failing. Hyunwoo could see the stress fractures spreading through the energy matrix. The prison had maybe an hour before it collapsed completely. He should run. Every instinct screamed at him to get as far away as possible before the most dangerous creature in the galaxy broke free. But something kept him frozen in place. When he looked at the dragon, he did not see a monster. He saw something ancient and tired and hurt. The dragon's eyes opened. They were the color of deep space with stars scattered through them. When they focused on him, Hyunwoo felt like he was being examined by something older than worlds. The dragon did not move, but somehow Hyunwoo knew it was aware of everything around it. It knew he was there. It knew he could help. The energy field flickered again. More warning lights came on. The dragon shifted slightly, and for the first time in centuries it tried to speak. The sound did not come through the air. It came directly into Hyunwoo's mind like a whisper made of starlight and sorrow. Help me. 2 words, simple and direct. But behind them was a weight of centuries and a pain so deep that it made Hyunwoo's eyes water. This creature had been trapped here for longer than his species had been traveling between stars. It had been forgotten by a galaxy that feared what it might do if it ever got free. Hyunwoo looked at the failing systems around the prison. He could fix them. His knowledge of machines was good enough to keep the dragon locked up for maybe another century. The safe thing to do. The smart thing to do. Or he could let it out. The dragon watched him with those ancient eyes and waited. It did not beg or threaten or promise rewards. It simply waited to see what kind of person had found it in its darkest hour. Hyunwoo made his choice. His hands moved to the control panel and began the shutdown sequence. The energy field that had held the galaxy's most feared prisoner for 3 centuries began to fade away. The dragon was free. The energy field collapsed with a sound like breaking glass. The dragon stepped out of her crystal prison with movements that seemed to flow like water. Despite her enormous size, she moved with perfect grace. Her massive form somehow fit in the chamber that had looked too small to hold her just moments before. Hyunwoo stumbled backward. His hand reached for the emergency beacon on his belt. One press would bring the Galactic Council's rescue ships, but his fingers would not move. He stood frozen as the dragon turned her star-filled eyes toward him. She was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Her scales caught the light from his helmet and threw it back in waves of silver and gold. When she breathed, small sparks of energy danced around her nostrils. Her wings stretched slightly, and Hyunwoo saw that they were covered in patterns that looked like star maps. The dragon lowered her great head until she was looking directly at him. When she spoke, her voice did not come through the air. It formed inside his mind like thoughts that were not his own. The words carried weight and sadness that made his chest tight. "My name is Nari. I have been waiting for you for a very long time." Hyunwoo found his voice with effort. "Waiting for me? But I am nobody special. I am just a mechanic." The dragon's eyes seemed to smile even though her mouth did not move. "That is exactly why I was waiting for you. Not a warrior or a king or a scientist. Just someone who sees a cage and chooses to open it." Images began to flow into Hyunwoo's mind. Not his memories, but hers. He saw Earth as it had been thousands of years ago. Primitive humans living in caves and fearing the dark, and watching over them from the shadows was Nari. She had been their guardian since the beginning. The images changed. He saw the first human cities, the first ships that sailed across oceans, the first rockets that reached for the stars. And through it all, Nari had been there, sometimes visible, more often hidden. She had guided humanity through its darkest hours and celebrated their greatest achievements. When humans finally left Earth and joined the other species among the stars, Nari had been proud. Her children had grown strong and wise. They were ready to take their place in the great community of worlds, but the other species were afraid. The images in Hyunwoo's mind grew darker. He saw meetings in shadowed rooms where alien leaders spoke in worried whispers. Humans were too ambitious, they said, too quick to explore and expand, and with a dragon guardian protecting them, they might become unstoppable. So they planned her downfall. The trial had been a lie from the beginning. They accused Nari of destroying a colony world. They showed evidence that looked real but had been created by their best scientists. They brought witnesses who swore they had seen her commit terrible crimes. Nari had tried to defend herself. She showed them the real truth. The colony had been destroyed by space pirates while she was protecting another world. She had arrived too late to save anyone. The guilt had torn at her heart for years, but they did not want to hear the truth. They wanted to be rid of the dragon who made humanity too dangerous to control. The sentence was life imprisonment in a temporal stasis field. She would be conscious but unable to move or speak. She would watch the centuries pass while trapped in a crystal cage. The prison was designed to last until the end of time itself. For 300 years, Nari had waited in that terrible isolation. She had watched through the station's sensors as humanity spread across the galaxy. She had seen them discover new worlds and make new friends among the stars. But she had also seen them face dangers alone that she should have been there to help them fight. The worst part was not the physical prison. It was knowing that her people thought she was a monster. The truth about her trial had been buried. History books called her a destroyer instead of a protector. Children learned to fear the dragon who had once kept them safe. Hyunwoo felt tears on his face that he did not remember shedding. The sadness in Nari's memories was almost too much to bear, but there was something else mixed in with the pain. When she looked at him, he felt something he had never experienced before. Hope. "Why did you help me?" Nari asked. You could have left me trapped. You could have reported what you found and collected a reward. Why did you choose to free me? Hyunwoo thought about it for a moment. Because you asked me to, and because keeping someone locked up for 300 years is wrong. I do not care what they say you did. The dragon's massive head tilted slightly. You believe I'm innocent? I believe you are tired and hurt and alone. That is enough for me. Something changed in Nari's eyes. The ancient sadness was still there, but it was joined by something brighter. A connection formed between them that Hyunwoo could feel like warmth spreading through his chest. This was what she had been waiting for. Not someone to worship her or fear her or try to use her power, just someone who saw her pain and chose kindness over suspicion. Sudden alarms began blaring throughout the station. Red lights flashed in urgent patterns. Computer screens that had been dark for centuries suddenly came to life with warnings in a dozen different languages. Nari's head snapped up. They know I am free. The station's systems are reporting to the Galactic Council. They will send ships. How long do we have? Hyunwoo asked. Not long. They will come with everything they have. They cannot risk me escaping into the galaxy. Hyunwoo looked around the crystal chamber. There was no other way out except the way he had come in. His repair pod was fast, but it could not outrun military ships. They would be trapped like animals in a cage. But Nari was smiling now. A real smile that showed teeth like polished diamonds. You freed me from one prison, she said. Now let me free us both from another. The dragon began to glow with inner light that grew brighter and brighter until Hyunwoo had to close his eyes. When he opened them again, the world had changed completely. Admiral Taemin stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched 50 warships drop out of hyperspace in perfect formation. The Galactic Council had given him clear orders. Find the escaped dragon and destroy it. Kill anyone who helped it escape. Make sure the galaxy's most dangerous prisoner never drew another breath. The old prison station hung in space before them like a broken toy. Its hull was dark and scarred by centuries of cosmic radiation. Warning beacons that had been silent for decades now flashed urgent messages about containment failure and escaped prisoners. Begin the scan, Taemin ordered. His weapons officer nodded and activated the most powerful sensors in the fleet. Energy beams swept through every corner of the station. They could detect a single heartbeat from 1,000 kilometers away. The scans came back empty. Sir, there is no life aboard the station, the sensor operator reported. No energy signatures. No heat traces, nothing. Taemin frowned. That was impossible. The dragon had been freed less than 2 hours ago. Where could it have gone? Dragons were massive creatures. They could not just vanish into thin air. What about escape pods? He asked. None launched, sir. The station's logs show no departures of any kind. Hyperspace signatures? Negative. No ships have jumped from this system in the past week. The Admiral felt a cold fear creeping up his spine. He had fought dragons before during the old wars. They were cunning and powerful, but they followed the same rules as every other living thing. They needed ships to travel between stars. They left traces when they moved. They could not simply disappear, unless the stories were true. Unless dragons really could do things that science said were impossible. Search every piece of debris, Taemin commanded. Check every asteroid in the system. They have to be here somewhere. But even as he gave the orders, he knew they would find nothing. The dragon and her human accomplice had vanished as completely as if they had never existed. 3 star systems away, in the cargo hold of a rusty freight ship, Nari carefully folded her wings around herself. The transformation had been painful and exhausting. Compressing her true form into something small enough to hide had taken more energy than she had used in decades. To anyone looking at her now, she appeared to be a tall human wearing bulky environmental armor. The disguise was not perfect, but it would fool casual observation. The real trick had been getting them off the station without being detected. Beside her, Hyunwoo worked on the ship's computer systems with tools he had never seen before. Nari had given him knowledge directly through their mental link. Information about technology that was centuries ahead of anything humans normally used. His hands moved with confidence as he modified sensor arrays and communication systems. The masking field should hold for another few hours, he said quietly. But if they do a deep scan, they will find us. They will not think to look for us here, Nari replied. Her voice was still in his mind, but now it felt warm and familiar instead of strange. Most species lose the ability to think creatively when they are afraid. The freight ship's captain was a tough woman named Boram, who had spent her life moving cargo that other people did not want found. She had taken one look at the credits Hyunwoo offered and agreed to transport them with no questions asked. But even she seemed nervous about her mysterious passengers. "Where are we headed?" Boram asked over the ship's communication system. "Anywhere but here," Hyunwoo answered. "Just keep jumping. Change course every few hours. We need to stay ahead of the search grid." "Those are military ships out there," Boram said. "Big ones. What kind of trouble are you two in?" "The kind that gets whole star systems evacuated," Nari said through the speakers. Her voice made the ship's hull vibrate slightly. "It would be better if you did not know more than that." Boram was quiet for a long moment. Then she laughed. "Lady, I have been smuggling contraband since I was 16. I know when not to ask questions. But I want double pay for this job." "Done," Hyunwoo said. As the freight ship jumped from system to system, always staying ahead of the council's search patterns, Nari began to feel something she had not experienced in centuries. Hope mixed with excitement and a growing sense of purpose. For 300 years she had dreamed only of revenge. She had imagined making her captors pay for their betrayal. She had planned elaborate punishments for those who had stolen her freedom and turned her people against her. But now, sitting in the dark cargo hold with a human mechanic who had risked everything to free her, revenge seemed less important than it once had. Hyunwoo had reminded her of something she had almost forgotten. Her true purpose was not to punish the guilty. It was to protect the innocent. "Tell me about your sister," she said to Hyunwoo as he finished his work on the ship's systems. He looked up in surprise. "How did you know about her?" "I can sense your motivations through our bond. You took this dangerous job to pay for her medicine. She is very important to you." Hyunwoo's face softened. "Her name is Young Mi. She has been sick since we were children. The doctors say there is no cure, but there are treatments that can help her live a normal life. They cost more money than I could make in 10 lifetimes. What if I told you there were other ways to heal her? Old ways that do not require expensive medicines?" "I would say that sounds too good to be true." Nari's disguised form shifted slightly. "Many things that sound impossible become possible when you have a dragon for a friend. But first we need to survive long enough for me to help her." Warning lights began flashing on the ship's control panel. Boram's voice crackled over the communication system with barely controlled panic. "We have a problem. 3 council destroyers just dropped out of hyperspace right on top of us. They are demanding we prepare to be boarded." Hyunwoo felt his heart stop. After everything they had been through, it seemed their luck had finally run out. But when he looked at Nari, she was not afraid, she was smiling. "It seems the galaxy's hunters have finally found their prey," she said. "Now let us show them what happens when the prey decides to fight back." Deep in the archive vaults of the Keth Empire, scholar Dong-hyun made a discovery that would change everything. He had been researching trade routes from the old expansion wars when he found a sealed section in the database, files that had been marked as classified for over 2,000 years. His hands shook as he opened the first document. The title read, "The True History of the Dragon Wars," and below it was a warning that anyone who shared this information would face execution. Dong-hyun had studied the official history in school like every other child in the galaxy. The dragons had been monsters who wanted to rule over all other species. They had enslaved entire worlds and demanded worship from primitive civilizations. The great powers of the galaxy had joined together to stop them before they could destroy everything. But the files told a completely different story. The dragons had not been conquerors. They had been guardians. Each one had been bonded to a developing species and had spent centuries guiding their growth. The Keth had once been protected by a dragon named Flamewing, who had taught them to build their first starships. The Vrex had been guided by Stormclaw, who had helped them survive the Ice Age on their homeworld. Every major civilization in the galaxy had once had a dragon guardian. The beings had watched over them like parents caring for children. They had protected them from space pirates and hostile aliens. They had shared knowledge and wisdom that had helped each species reach the stars. But as these civilizations grew stronger, they began to see their protectors differently. Dragons were powerful. What if they decided to become rulers instead of guardians? What if they turned against the species they had once protected? Fear replaced gratitude. Suspicion replaced trust. The Dragon Wars had not been fought in self-defense. They had been a campaign of genocide carried out by species who feared what might happen if their former protectors ever became their enemies. Dong-hyun read file after file with growing horror. The dragons had been betrayed by the very people they had spent their lives protecting. They had been hunted down one by one until only a few remained. Those last survivors had been put on trial for crimes they had never committed and locked away in prisons designed to last forever. The scholar looked at the final entry in the database. It was a prison record for the last surviving dragon, a guardian named Nari who had been sentenced to eternal imprisonment for the destruction of Colony 7. But buried in the files was proof that she had been innocent. She had been protecting another world when the colony was attacked by pirates. The trial had been a lie. The evidence had been manufactured. The galaxy's greatest protector had been condemned for a crime she had not committed. Dong-hyun sat back in his chair and tried to process what he had learned. Everything he had been taught about galactic history was wrong. The dragons had not been monsters. They had been heroes who had given everything to protect others and had been destroyed for their kindness. But Nari was still alive. According to the prison records, her temporal field was still active. She was still trapped in that terrible isolation after 3 centuries of suffering. The scholar made a decision that would cost him his career and possibly his life. He began copying the files to a secure transmission system. The truth needed to be told even if it brought down governments and started wars. Within hours, the hidden history began spreading across underground networks throughout the galaxy. Rebels and freedom fighters shared the files in secret. Historians who had always suspected the official story was incomplete finally had proof of the conspiracy. On dozens of worlds, people began to remember old stories their grandparents had told them. Tales of great winged protectors who had watched over their ancestors in times of darkness. Songs about dragons who had carried refugees to safety during the expansion wars. Legends that had been dismissed as primitive superstition suddenly seemed much more real. The reaction was immediate and explosive. On the human colony world of New Hope, protesters filled the streets demanding that their government tell them the truth about their dragon guardian. On Rex Prime, students occupied the Capitol building and refused to leave until officials admitted the lies they had been taught. But the strongest reaction came from the humans themselves. Earth's historical archives contained more references to dragons than any other world. Ancient artwork showed winged figures watching over early human settlements. Cave paintings depicted dragons fighting alongside primitive warriors against unknown enemies. Humanity had not known that their species had once been protected by a dragon. The discovery awakened something deep in the human spirit, a memory that had been buried but never completely forgotten. President Sujin of the Human Colonial Alliance faced an impossible choice. The Galactic Council was demanding that humanity surrender the escaped dragon and her accomplice. They threatened economic sanctions and military action if humans refused to cooperate. But public opinion was shifting rapidly as more evidence of the cover-up emerged. Protesters surrounded government buildings on every human world. They carried signs with pictures of dragons and demanded that their leaders protect the being who had once protected them. The president called an emergency session of the Alliance Parliament. Representatives from 40 human worlds gathered to debate the most important decision in their species, history. "The Council wants us to betray our own guardian," said Representative Jin-A from the outer colonies. "How can we hand over the being who watched over our ancestors for thousands of years? But if we refuse, they will destroy us," argued Representative Kyung-ho from the core worlds. "We cannot fight the entire galaxy." The debate raged for hours. Some representatives feared the Council's military might. Others believed that humanity had a moral duty to protect their ancient guardian. The vote was scheduled for the next day, and everyone knew it would be close. Meanwhile, news of the debates reached Boram's freight ship as it jumped through hyperspace. Nari listened to the broadcast with growing amazement. She had expected fear and rejection when the truth came out. Instead, humans were rallying to defend her. "Your species continues to surprise me," she told Hyunwoo. "After 3 centuries of believing I was a monster, they are willing to risk everything to protect me." "That is what humans do," Hyunwoo replied. "When we learn we have been lied to, we get angry. And when we find out someone we should have protected was hurt instead, we try to make it right." Nari felt something she had not experienced since her imprisonment began. She felt hope that the galaxy might be ready to remember what it had lost when it chose fear over wisdom. But their moment of peace was shattered when alarms began ringing throughout the ship. 3 council destroyers had found them again, and this time, there would be no escape. The revelation of the hidden truth sparked uprisings across dozens of worlds. On the human colony of Kepler 442b, where plague had killed half the population 20 years ago, protesters held up pictures of Nari. They remembered the old stories. Their grandparents told about a great winged figure who had watched over Earth during its darkest times. On Arcturus Prime, the descendants of refugees who had fled the Keith expansion wars gathered in the ancient squares. They sang songs that had been passed down for generations, songs about dragons who had carried their ancestors to safety when their homeworld burned. President Sujin stood before the Human Colonial Alliance Parliament as representatives shouted arguments at each other. The vote was scheduled to begin in 1 hour. Half the representatives wanted to surrender Nari to save humanity from the Council's wrath. The other half demanded that they protect their ancient guardian no matter the cost. "If we give her up, we become no better than the ones who betrayed her 300 years ago," declared Representative Minseo from the frontier worlds. "How can we call ourselves human if we abandon someone who protected us for so long? And if we refuse, the Council will turn every human world into ash," countered Representative Wu Jin from the industrial sectors. "We have families to protect. Children who will die if we choose the wrong path." The president raised her hand for silence. The Great Hall fell quiet as 500 representatives waited for her words. "The Council has given us 12 hours to decide," she said. "Whatever we choose will echo through history. Our children will either praise us for our courage or curse us for our cowardice." Light years away, Commander Minho of the Alliance Navy stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched 3 Council destroyers surround Boram's freight ship. His orders were clear: capture or destroy the escaped dragon and anyone helping her. But his conscience was tearing him apart. Minho had grown up on stories of dragons. His grandmother had told him about the great protector who had watched over their family during the resource wars. She had described wings that blocked out the sun and eyes that held the wisdom of ages. He had always thought they were just fairy tales. Now he knew they were real. And he was being ordered to kill the being who had once saved his ancestors. "Sir, the Council ships are demanding we open fire," his weapons officer reported. "They say the freight ship is carrying a Class 1 galactic threat." Minho stared at the small cargo vessel on his main screen. Inside was a creature who had spent centuries protecting humanity. And beside her was a simple mechanic who had chosen compassion over fear. "Sir, we are receiving a transmission," his communications officer announced. "It is coming from the freight ship on all frequencies." "Put it through," Minho ordered. Nari's voice filled the bridge of every ship in the system. Human and alien crews listened as she spoke not of vengeance or ancient grievances, but of hope. "I am Nari, last guardian of the dragon kind," she began. "For 3 centuries I have been imprisoned for crimes I did not commit, but I do not speak to you now seeking justice for past wrongs. I speak to you about the future." Images began flowing through the communication system. Visions of what the galaxy could become if its people worked together instead of living in fear of each other. Worlds where different species shared knowledge and resources. Cities where humans and aliens built wonders that neither could create alone. "The dragons did not seek to rule you," Nari continued. "We sought to prepare you for what is coming. There are threats in the darkness between stars that make our old conflicts seem like children's games. The barriers that once protected this galaxy are failing. Soon, you will need each other more than you have ever needed anyone before." On the bridge of the Alliance flagship, Minho felt something stir in his chest, a connection that reached beyond species and politics and fear. He had felt it before in dreams he could not quite remember, dreams of flying through stars with wings he did not have. The bond between dragons and their protected species had never been truly broken. It had only been buried under centuries of lies and misdirection. Now, as Nari's voice touched minds across the fleet, that ancient connection began to wake up. Yunwu stood beside Nari in the freight ship's cargo hold. The bond between them had changed him in ways he was only beginning to understand. When Council ships targeted their vessel with weapons designed to vaporize entire cities, he raised his hand without thinking. The energy beams bent away from the ship as if reality itself refused to let harm come to the last Guardian. Weapons that could crack planets simply stopped working when aimed at their target. Minho watched in amazement as his sensors registered impossible energy readings from the freight ship. The human mechanic was doing things that science said were impossible. But then, dragons had always made the impossible seem routine. "All ships, stand down," Minho ordered. "Lower your weapons and withdraw to safe distance." "Sir, the Council commanders are demanding we attack immediately," his communications officer reported. "Tell the Council commanders that the Alliance Navy does not fire on civilians without proof of wrongdoing," Minho replied. "And until someone shows me evidence that these people have committed actual crimes, they remain under Alliance protection." The Council destroyers opened fire on the Alliance ships instead. The battle was brief, but decisive. Alliance vessels fought with a coordination and skill that surprised their enemies. It was as if something was guiding their tactics and sharpening their reflexes. When the smoke cleared, 2 Council ships had been disabled, and the third was retreating. Minho's fleet had suffered only minor damage despite being outnumbered. "How did we do that?" his tactical officer asked in amazement. Minho looked at the freight ship on his screen and smiled. "We remembered what we used to be when we had someone watching over us." Back on Earth, President Sujin watched the battle reports with growing excitement. The Alliance Navy had not just survived an encounter with superior Council forces. They had won decisively. The vote in Parliament was no longer close. Representatives who had been terrified of Council retaliation now saw hope for something better. The motion to protect Nari passed by a margin of 4-1. Humanity had chosen to stand with their ancient guardian. Now the galaxy would see what humans could do when they remembered they were not alone. But in the dark spaces between stars, ancient enemies began to stir. The bonds between dragons and their protected species had been the galaxy's first line of defense against threats that existed beyond normal space and time. With those bonds awakening again, the creatures that had been held at bay for millennia knew their time of hiding was ending. The real war was about to begin. The Void Hunters had been waiting in the darkness between galaxies for thousands of years. They were creatures of pure hunger that existed partly outside normal space and time. Ancient beings that fed not just on life but on the very idea of existence itself. The first attacks came at the edge of known space where the galaxy's outer colonies struggled to survive on barren worlds. The mining station on Kepler-88 simply vanished. One moment it was there broadcasting routine status reports. The next moment there was nothing but empty space where a thriving facility had been. Search ships sent to investigate found no wreckage. No escape pods. No sign that anything had ever existed in that location. It was as if the station and everyone on it had been erased from reality. Similar reports began flooding in from across the rim worlds. Entire colonies disappearing without explanation. Ships going silent between star systems. Patrol fleets that entered certain regions of space and never returned. The few survivors who managed to escape told stories that made no sense. They described creatures that looked like living shadows with too many teeth. Beings that moved through solid matter as if it was air. Things that could reach into a person's mind and steal their memories while they watched helplessly. Admiral Taemin received the reports in his command center on the Council homeworld. He had been so focused on hunting one escaped dragon that he had ignored warning signs of a much greater threat. The ancient defense networks that protected the galaxy's borders were failing one by one. His science advisors tried to explain what they were facing, but their words sounded like madness. The Void Hunters existed in multiple dimensions at once. They could not be fought with normal weapons because they could simply choose not to exist in the same reality as incoming fire. "How do we stop something that can't be killed?" Taemin asked his staff. "According to the old records, they were once held back by the Dragon Guardians," his chief researcher replied. "The bonds between dragons and their protected species created barriers that the Void Hunters could not cross." Taemin felt ice form in his stomach. "And now? Now there is only one dragon left, and we have spent 3 centuries teaching the galaxy to fear her." On the bridge of their stolen Alliance cruiser, Nari felt the approach of her oldest enemies like a physical pain in her chest. She had fought the Void Hunters before in the early days when hundreds of Dragon Guardians had stood united against them. Even then, victory had come at terrible cost. Now she was alone, the last Guardian facing an enemy that had grown stronger during the long years of her imprisonment. "What are these things?" Hyunwoo asked as he watched the sensor reports streaming in from the outer systems. "They are what your species would call demons," Nari replied. "Creatures from the spaces between realities. They exist only to consume and destroy. The Dragon Guardians were created specifically to hold them back." Images flowed from her mind to his. Battles fought in the void between stars where dragons breathed stellar fire at enemies that existed in 11 dimensions simultaneously. Entire solar systems turned into fortresses to protect the developing civilizations within. "But we beat them before," Hyunwoo said. "You and the other dragons drove them back. We held them back. They cannot be truly destroyed as long as entropy exists in the universe. But the barriers we built kept them trapped in the deep dark where they could not reach inhabited space. And now those barriers are falling. They began failing the moment the last dragon was imprisoned. For 3 centuries they have been weakening. Soon they will collapse completely." Hyunwoo studied the tactical displays showing Void Hunter incursions across the galaxy. Even with the advanced knowledge Nari had shared with him, he could not see how one dragon and her human companion could stand against such overwhelming darkness. But something was happening that neither of them had expected. As reports of the Void Hunter attacks spread, old enemies began putting aside their differences. The Keth Empire and the Vrex Federation had been at war for 50 years. Now their fleets were working together to evacuate threatened colonies. Species that had not spoken to each other in generations were sharing intelligence and resources. The threat from outside was so terrible that internal conflicts seemed petty and meaningless. On Earth, President Soo-jin received a message that would have been impossible just weeks before. Representatives from every major power in the galaxy were requesting an emergency meeting. They wanted to discuss coordinated defense against the Void Hunters. More importantly, they wanted to talk to Nari. "They are scared," the president told her advisors. "For the first time in their history, the galaxy's great powers are facing something they cannot fight with politics or economics or military force." "Will you arrange the meeting?" asked her military commander. Soo-jin looked at the casualty reports from the rim worlds. Millions of people dead or missing. Entire star systems going dark. And this was just the beginning. "Send the message," she ordered. "Tell them the Human Alliance will host emergency talks on the neutral station at Deep Space 7. And tell them that Nari will be there to speak for herself." In the cargo hold of their cruiser, Nari felt something she had not experienced in centuries. Unity. Not the false unity of conquest or fear, but the real cooperation that came when people chose to work together for survival. The bonds between dragons and their protected species had been designed for exactly this moment. When the galaxy faced its darkest hour, when ancient enemies returned from the void, the children the dragons had raised would stand together against the darkness. But would it be enough? The Void Hunters were stronger now and the Guardians were gone. All that remained was one dragon, one human, and the hope that the galaxy could remember what it meant to fight as one people against a common enemy. As their ship jumped toward Deep Space 7, Nari began to glow with inner fire. The final battle was coming and she would face it the way she had always lived, as a guardian protecting those who could not protect themselves, even if it cost her everything she had left to give. The final battle came at the galactic core, where the ancient network of guardian stations had once maintained barriers between dimensions. Massive structures built by the first dragons floated in the cosmic storm of the galaxy's heart. Most had been dark for millennia, but now they began to flicker back to life as Nari approached. The combined fleets of every major galactic power waited in formation around the core. Ships that had been enemies for generations now flew side by side. Human cruisers alongside Keth dreadnoughts, Vrex fighters escorting Altarian carriers. The greatest armada in galactic history assembled to face an enemy that conventional weapons could not touch. Admiral Taemin stood on his flagship's bridge and watched the sensor readings with growing dread. The Void Hunters were pouring through collapsing dimensional barriers like black water through a broken dam. Thousands of them. Millions. More than had ever been seen in one place since the first Dragon Wars. "All ships report ready for battle," his communications officer announced. "Battle," Taemin muttered. How do you fight something that exists in 11 dimensions at once? How do you kill something that feeds on the concept of death itself? His answer came when Nari's ship reached the center of the formation. The dragon emerged in her true form for the first time since her escape. Even the veterans who had fought in a dozen wars stopped what they were doing to stare. She was beautiful and terrible beyond description. Her scales blazed with the light of newborn stars. Her wings stretched across kilometers of space. When she opened her mouth, stellar fire poured out in streams that could melt asteroids. But it was not her size or power that made the assembled fleets gasp in wonder. It was the way reality seemed to bend around her. Space itself recognized her as something that belonged there, something that had always been there, protecting and guiding and watching over the children of the galaxy. The Void Hunters struck without warning. They came from directions that did not exist in normal space. Some emerged from inside solid ships. Others materialized in the vacuum and began tearing apart reality with claws made of concentrated entropy. The first wave of attacks was devastating. Entire squadrons simply ceased to exist. Ships that had survived 100 battles were erased from the universe as if they had never been built. Crews that had families and dreams and hopes became nothing more than empty space. But then Nari entered the fight and everything changed. She moved through the Void Hunters like lightning through a storm cloud. Her breath weapon was not just fire, but pure creation. Where it touched the creatures of entropy, they burned with light that existed in dimensions they could not escape to. More importantly, her presence began awakening something in the crews of the allied fleets. The bonds between dragons and their protected species had never been truly broken. They had only been sleeping.
Now, in the galaxy's darkest hour, those ancient connections blazed back to life. Human gunners found themselves targeting enemies with impossible accuracy.
Keth engineers repaired damage faster than it could accumulate. Frex pilots flew with coordination that seemed telepathic. Altarian medics healed wounds that should have been fatal. Each species began manifesting abilities they had inherited from their time under draconic protection. Gifts that had been dormant for millennia suddenly awakened as Nari's power flowed through the mental links that connected her to all life in the galaxy. Hyunwoo stood at the center of the largest Guardian station, his hands flying over controls that no human had ever been designed to understand. The bond with Nari had changed him more than he realized. Knowledge flowed through him like water through a broken dam, understanding of technology that predated galactic civilization. Around him, other humans were experiencing similar transformations. Men and women who had been clerks and farmers and teachers found themselves operating weapons that could crack moons. The dragon's gift was not power over others, but the power to become more than they had ever imagined possible. The tide of battle began to turn. Void hunters that had seemed unstoppable were being driven back by coordinated attacks from species working in perfect harmony. Ships that should have been destroyed fought on with crews that refused to accept defeat. But the real victory came when Hyunwoo realized what the ancient dragons had truly been protecting against. The Void Hunters were not just destroyers. They were the immune system of a dying universe trying to prevent the birth of something new. Every act of creation weakened them. Every moment of hope and cooperation between species made them less real. Every time someone chose to help instead of harm, to build instead of destroy, to love instead of fear, the creatures of entropy lost a little more of their hold on reality. The breakthrough came when a damaged Keth cruiser was about to be overrun by Void Hunters. Without orders or hesitation, human and Vrex and Altarian ships moved to protect it. They fought not for territory or resources or political advantage, but simply because it was the right thing to do. In that moment of perfect unity, something unprecedented happened. The barriers between species that had defined galactic politics for millennia simply dissolved. Not through conquest or negotiation, but through the recognition that they were all part of something larger than themselves. The Void Hunters felt it happen and screamed with voices that existed in dimensions beyond sound. For the first time in cosmic history, the galaxy truly stood as one people. Billions of minds thinking as one, countless hearts beating with the same purpose. The creatures of entropy could not exist in a reality where creation and cooperation were stronger than destruction and fear. They did not die or retreat or surrender. They simply became irrelevant. The universe no longer had space for beings whose only purpose was to tear down what others built up. Nari felt the moment of victory, like sunrise after an endless night. The last Guardian's vigil was finally over. Her children had grown strong enough to stand on their own. More than that, they had learned to stand together. The ancient barriers were no longer needed. The galaxy itself had become the Guardian now. Every world, every ship, every person who chose hope over despair became part of a living defense against the forces of darkness. As the combined fleets celebrated their impossible victory, Nari looked at Hyunwoo and smiled. He was no longer the frightened mechanic who had found her in a crystal prison. The bond between them had awakened humanity's true potential, and through them, the potential of every species in the galaxy. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now we build something that has never existed before," she replied. "A galaxy where the strong protect the weak not out of duty but out of love. Where different species work together not because they have to, but because they want to. Where the dragon's dream of unity finally becomes real." The last Guardian's stand was over. The age of true cooperation had begun.